At dinner, my parents sneered, "How does it feel being useless?" The words cut through me like a knife, but I forced myself to keep my face calm even as my chest burned. My younger sister Danielle sat at the head of the table, her polished nails tapping against her wine glass, her smirk smug and satisfied. Our parents beamed at her like she was some golden trophy. "Your sister just made partner at her firm," my father announced, his voice dripping with pride. "And here you are, Selena, 26, and still, what exactly? Drifting." My mother leaned in, her voice sharp and condescending. "You can't just live off scraps forever. You should learn something from Danielle. Look at her, driven, successful, respected. And you've wasted your education, your time, and honestly our patience." Danielle tilted her head, her smirk widening. "Maybe Selena can manage my charity project someday. At least then she'd feel useful for once." The table erupted in laughter. My father chuckling, my mother shaking her head in mock pity, Danielle basking in her own cruelty. I stared down at my plate, my fork frozen in my hand. Every word was a familiar sting, the kind I had grown up with, but tonight it hit differently. I had walked into this dinner expecting some barbed comments, maybe even another long lecture comparing me to Danielle. But the outright contempt, the laughter, the dismissal, it was heavier than usual, and it pressed against me until I felt I couldn't breathe. So I didn't snap. I didn't cry. I didn't let them see me break. Instead, I slowly lifted my gaze, meeting each of their eyes in turn. My father's smug superiority, my mother's disappointed frown, Danielle's gleeful malice. Then I asked, my voice low but steady, "Would you still call me useless if you knew what I was working on?" The laughter stopped. Forks paused in midair. Even Danielle's smirk faltered for a second before she masked it with another roll of her eyes. My father frowned, irritation flickering in his gaze. My mother raised a brow, unimpressed, but I could see curiosity creeping in despite herself. I didn't explain further. I let the question hang there, sharp and heavy, a promise and a warning all at once. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what was coming. When I was little, I learned quickly what it meant to live in the shadows. Danielle was always the star, shiny new dresses, polished shoes, and the camera always flashing in her direction. My clothes came from her closet, worn at the seams, already carrying the memories of her better days. No one ever noticed if mine fit too tightly or hung too loose. It didn't matter because they were good enough for Selena. My father's words were constant, echoing through my childhood like an unwanted chant. "You'll never make it unless you're like your sister." I'd hear it after school when I'd sit at the table sketching little patterns and designs on scraps of paper. I wanted to create something of my own, something that carried my name, but he'd laugh, shaking his head. "Fantasies," he called them. My mother would sigh, brushing me aside. "Be realistic, Selena. Danielle's the one who will go far." Even in moments where I worked harder than anyone, it was invisible to them. I stayed up late sewing pieces together by hand, dreaming of turning discarded fabric into something beautiful. I cut, stitched, and imagined futures they never believed in. But each time I shared an idea, they dismissed it. "Leave that childish nonsense," my father said, pointing at Danielle's perfect grades. "Follow her example if you want to survive." The memory that still stings the most is the day I discovered my savings gone. I had spent years setting aside birthday money, summer job paychecks, every small dollar I could scrape together. That account was my hope, the first step toward building something real. Then one morning I logged in to find it empty. My parents didn't even hide it. They told me calmly that they'd used it to help Danielle pay her law school expenses. "She's investing in her future," my mother said. "She needs it more than you do." I sat in silence, staring at the numbers on the screen, my chest hollow. All those years of saving erased with one decision. No apology. No recognition that it was mine. Just another reminder that in their eyes, Danielle's path mattered and mine never would. That was the moment I realized. My dreams weren't safe with them. If I wanted to create something meaningful, I'd have to protect it in silence, far away from their reach. Danielle always had a way of making everything hers. In school she charmed teachers, claimed group projects as if no one else had contributed, and somehow always landed in the spotlight without lifting half the weight. By the time we both reached college, I should have expected it. But I didn't, not when it came to something so personal, something I had poured myself into. I had been working for months on a plan. It wasn't just sketches anymore. It was research, sourcing ideas, notes on fabrics, even strategies on how to make fashion more ethical and sustainable. Late nights in the library, endless drafts. This brand was supposed to be my way forward. I trusted her enough to show her pieces of it, thought maybe for once she'd be proud of me instead of mocking. Then one afternoon I overheard her talking with a group of older students. My words, my exact phrases, rolled off her tongue as she described her brilliant idea for an eco-focused clothing line. They listened, impressed, nodding as if she had come up with it herself. My stomach turned. At first I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe she would admit later where the idea came from. But the truth came fast. She had set up a meeting with potential investors using the presentation I had put together. Slides I had designed, details I had researched. My vision twisted into her portfolio. And worse, our parents knew. When I confronted them, their faces held no shame. My father simply said, "Danielle is better equipped to make this real. You're too naive to handle that kind of responsibility." My mother nodded, her tone dismissive. "Be proud your sister is carrying the family forward. You wouldn't manage it anyway." I remember the sting in my chest, the way my hands shook as I held the evidence of what she'd done. All I got in return were cold words, as though my effort, my creativity, meant nothing except as fuel for her climb. That day something inside me cracked. I stopped showing them my work. I stopped hoping for approval. But even as my confidence sank, I locked the memory away. The betrayal etched itself into me like fire on skin. I would never forget the way they looked at her with pride and at me with nothing but dismissal. The night after that dinner, I walked into my cramped apartment and let the silence swallow me whole. The words replayed over and over. My father's mocking tone, my mother's scorn, Danielle's satisfied smirk as if she had finally won some lifelong contest. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, my fists clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. Every insult they threw at me burned, but beneath the pain something harder began to form. "They'll choke on the word useless when they see what I've built," I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling with rage and resolve. Because they didn't know. They thought I had nothing. They thought I was still that girl waiting for approval that never came. But I had already started building something they couldn't steal this time. When my Uncle Samuel passed, he left me the old textile workshop no one else wanted. Dusty machines, broken looms, fabric scraps scattered like forgotten memories. It was worthless to them, but to me it was a beginning. He had always believed in my ideas even when no one else did. And when I stepped into that abandoned space for the first time, I felt like he had given me more than a building. He had given me a chance. Every evening after work shifts and long weekends, I slipped away to the workshop. I swept the floors, oiled rusted machines, and made sketches pinned against the cracked walls. I studied eco-friendly fabrics, researched suppliers, and tested designs late into the night. Slowly the place began to come alive again. It wasn't just about clothes anymore. It was about proving them wrong. About taking every dismissal, every cruel laugh, and turning it into fuel. Danielle could take credit for my past ideas, but not this. This belonged to me and no one would rip it from my hands. As I stood in the dim light of my apartment that night, anger burning into determination, I knew I had crossed a line. The version of me that begged for scraps of recognition was gone. What waited ahead was a fight, but this time I was ready. The workshop became my second home, though in truth it felt more like my first. Each day I slipped through its creaking doors, sleeves rolled up, ready to bring life back to the place that had been abandoned for years. BIMBO Adeyemi was the only one who knew. She had always been good with machines, the type who could fix anything with her hands and a little patience. Together we took on the dust, the rust, and the endless repairs, turning broken metal into working parts again. Nights blurred into mornings as we tinkered with fabrics, testing how blends reacted, cutting, stitching, and adjusting until something new took shape. I focused on patterns and design, while Naomi kept the machines alive, her laughter filling the space when one of our trials fell apart. For every failed piece that ended up in a scrap pile, there was another that showed promise. Slowly the workshop felt less like a ruin and more like a factory of dreams. When we finally carried a small batch to a craft fair, my heart pounded in my chest. Tables lined with handmade goods surrounded us, but when people stopped at ours, their eyes lit up. They ran their fingers across the fabric, asked questions, handed over bills, and walked away wearing pieces I had made with my own hands. I stood there stunned, watching strangers love what my family had called foolish. The fair became the first step, then came more. Orders trickled in from word of mouth. Neighbors asking if I had more, shopkeepers wanting samples. I kept every bit of it hidden from home. To them I was still the same daughter drifting aimlessly. I let them think it better that way until the time was right. Then came the call that shifted everything. A boutique owner who had seen my work asked if I could deliver a larger order. Her voice was serious, her tone professional. She wasn't doing me a favor. She believed in what I was making. The weight of that moment settled deep inside me. For the first time I allowed myself to breathe in a taste of the future. Each sale, each stitch, each late night was building something bigger. And though they didn't know it yet, I was no longer the person they mocked. I was becoming someone they'd never see coming. The next time I sat across from them at the long dining table, the air was thick with the same routine. Danielle glowed under the spotlight, her every word treated like gospel. My father leaned forward eagerly, recounting her latest climb at the firm, embellishing every detail as though she had conquered the world. My mother nodded along, her smile stretched wide, the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Danielle basked in it, swirling the stem of her glass, her tone dripping with superiority. "Maybe Selena can model for one of our charity campaigns someday," she said, her eyes darting to me, sparkling with mockery. At least then she'd finally contribute to something meaningful. My father roared with laughter, slapping his hand against the table as if it were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "That's a good one," he said, his chest shaking with amusement. My mother didn't laugh, but her expression was worse. She only sighed, shaking her head with that familiar blend of pity and irritation. "Our biggest disappointment," she murmured under her breath, as if the words were simply a fact of life. Their voices blurred into one cruel chorus, the same song I had been forced to hear for years. My fork rested on my plate untouched, my throat tight but my face calm. I didn't let the bitterness in their words show, didn't give Danielle the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead I pressed my teeth into the inside of my cheek, letting the sting anchor me. I reminded myself of the workshop, of the orders stacking up, of Naomi's steady encouragement and the sparks of hope that grew each day. They thought I was cornered, that I had nothing, but they had no idea the ground had already shifted beneath them. So I sat there, silent, enduring their sneers like armor against arrows. Not a single word escaped me, though inside I repeated the same promise. Soon. They could laugh now, mock me, label me a failure. But the moment was coming when their pride in Danielle would taste like ash. I lowered my gaze, not in shame, but to hide the smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Revenge was closer than they realized. The morning the call came, I almost didn't believe it was real. A man who had walked past our stall at the market weeks earlier introduced himself as the owner of a small chain of eco-boutiques. He spoke with calm certainty, telling me he'd been watching how people reacted to my pieces and wanted to stock them across his stores. His order was larger than anything I had imagined. Numbers that turned our late-night experiments into a business overnight. The workshop buzzed with new energy. Machines that had once groaned reluctantly now ran for hours. Bolts of fabric covered every surface, patterns hung on the walls, and laughter echoed as more hands joined the work. I hired women from the neighborhood, many of them mothers who had struggled to find steady jobs. Their gratitude filled the room, but more than that, their pride stitched itself into every garment. What began as survival became community, and each paycheck I handed out felt like another layer of purpose settling onto my shoulders. Naomi, as always, stood beside me through the whirlwind, her grin wide as she studied the first completed shipment stacked in boxes. "You need to tell them," she urged one evening, brushing fabric threads off her shirt. "They should see what you've done. Make them swallow their words." But I shook my head. "Not yet. They'll hear it in the right way." I wanted the reveal to cut deeper, to arrive when they least expected it, when their smug certainty left no room for excuses. Word traveled faster than I had anticipated. Customers came back for more, shopkeepers whispered about the sudden demand, and soon the name of my brand floated through the community like a secret everyone wanted to share. I overheard strangers discussing it in cafes, their voices filled with admiration, never knowing the creator was sitting just a table away. Then, inevitably, Danielle found out. I could sense it before I even saw her, the shift in her tone when she called, her questions too casual, her interest too sharp. Rumors had reached her ears, and with them, the first crack in her certainty that she was the only one destined to shine. For the first time in years, I didn't dread her attention. I welcomed it. One afternoon, the door of the workshop creaked open and Danielle stepped inside, heels clicking against the floor as if she owned the place. She glanced around with wide eyes, a rehearsed smile fixed on her lips. "Wow, Selena," she said lightly, "this is impressive. I had no idea you were doing all this." Her voice carried sugar, but I could taste the bitterness beneath it. She moved slowly through the room, fingertips brushing fabrics, eyes scanning the sketches pinned to the wall. Every question she asked seemed casual: where I sourced materials, how large the orders were, what plans I had for scaling, but her gaze sharpened with each answer I avoided. I played along, polite, careful, giving her nothing more than surface details. She left with that same smile, though her eyes betrayed the calculation working behind it. I knew Danielle well enough to understand she wasn't here to celebrate me. She was measuring, probing, waiting for the right angle to strike. It didn't take long for her attempt. My investor called a week later, his tone amused as he recounted the meeting. Danielle had walked into his office uninvited, pitching herself as the more experienced choice. She laid out her credentials, her firm's connections, her supposed ability to take my brand to the next level. She spoke of me as if I were a child dabbling in a grown-up's world, someone unfit to handle what I had created. But he refused her without hesitation. "Your sister's work speaks for itself," he told her. "People respond to her vision, not corporate polish." He assured me his loyalty was with me, that authenticity mattered more than the flashy promises she dangled before him. When I hung up the phone, a wave of anger and clarity settled over me. Danielle hadn't changed. She would claw, steal, and scheme just as she always had, convinced the world belonged to her alone. And now that I had built something she couldn't claim as easily, she would try every trick to tear it away. But this time was different. I wasn't the naive girl she once walked over. I had learned and I was ready. Her games no longer frightened me, they only sharpened my resolve. The house was crowded, music playing softly beneath the murmur of voices. My parents had spared no expense for Danielle's celebration, every corner decorated to highlight her rise. Guests mingled with glasses in hand, all eyes inevitably drawn to my sister as she floated through the room, basking in admiration. My father stood at her side, his chest puffed with pride, while my mother hovered close, her smile stretched wide. When I arrived, their glances were brief, almost dismissive, as though my presence was an afterthought. Danielle noticed too, her smirk curling as she welcomed me loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Selena made it," she announced, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Maybe she'll take notes tonight on how real success looks." Laughter trickled among the crowd, sharp and cruel, echoing the same lines I'd heard my whole life. She continued, her voice rising above the chatter, describing her firm's achievements with exaggerated flair. And then, as though she couldn't resist, she turned the spotlight my way. "My sister is still figuring things out," she said, pausing for effect. "But that's okay. Not everyone can shine." I let the silence settle, steadying my breath. Then I spoke, calm and measured. "Actually, I've been busy too. Perhaps you've heard of the feature in Green Style magazine last month." Heads turned. A ripple of recognition spread through the room. I pulled out a copy from my bag, the cover displaying one of my designs. Gasps followed, guests pressing closer, flipping pages, reading my name printed in bold. Conversations shifted in an instant. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years congratulated me, shaking my hand, praising the work. Friends of the family asked for details, wanting to know how they could purchase. The room that once dismissed me now pulsed with excitement, their admiration directed squarely at me. Across the room, my parents sat frozen, expressions stiff, wine glasses untouched. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's smile faltered, their silence louder than any insult they'd ever thrown. Danielle's face burned red, her nails digging into her palm as she tried to mask her fury. For the first time, the balance had shifted. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat. I simply stood in the center of their stage and let the truth speak louder than all their years of mockery. The night air was cool as the last guests drifted away, their words of praise for me still echoing in the halls. My parents lingered by the doorway, their earlier pride in Danielle replaced with unease. My father cleared his throat, softer than I'd ever heard. "Selena, maybe we can talk about working together. You could bring us in, let the family share in what you've built. My mother's eyes were pleading, her tone almost desperate. We only want to be part of your journey now. You've come so far, we should stand together. I looked at them, the same people who had laughed at me, belittled me, emptied me of worth when I needed them most. My voice was steady, unshaken. When I needed family, you called me useless. No. You're just strangers who raised me. The silence that followed was heavier than their insults had ever been. My father's shoulders slumped. My mother's lips trembled. Danielle stood off to the side, her glare sharp enough to cut, her envy pouring out in waves she couldn't hide. I didn't wait for their replies. I turned, lifted my chin, and walked out into the night, the sound of my heels echoing like punctuation on years of pain. Behind me, regret swallowed the room. Ahead of me, freedom stretched wide. For the first time, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the shadow. I was exactly who I was meant to be. Do you think I was right to walk away from the people who called me useless, or should I have let them back into my life? Tell me in the comments. I'm eager to hear. Don't forget to subscribe.